This episode of AHLA Speaking of Health Law is brought to you by AHLA members and donors like you. For more information, visit AmericanHealthLaw.org.
Hello, everybody. This is Rob Gerberry. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Summa Health and the President-elect Designate of the American Health Law Association. I'd like to welcome you to the latest in our continuing series of podcasts on corporate governance issues affecting healthcare organizations. Today's topic is ripped from the headlines, focuses on a pronouncement related to a report from the National Association of Corporate Directors on building a high-trust board-CEO relationship. As many of our listeners know well, the demands on health industry leadership, both CEOs and boards, is rapidly evolving. Not only must they confront the same technology, economic, societal, and global disruptions that all complex businesses are facing, but they also must confront the regulatory, financial, and constituent disruptions that are unique to the healthcare industry. And these demands and disruptions place unusual and undesirable pressures on the board and the CEO's relationship, sometimes to the detriment of organizational leadership. To help these leaders confront these issues, the new NACD report offers a series of recommendations as well as a detailed toolkit. And both the recommendations and toolkit are tailor-made for interpretation and application by the Healthcare Corporate Counsel in his or her primary role as governance counsel to the board. No doubt counsel want to collaborate with the healthcare company's chief governance officer and the chief compliance officer to the extent their duties overlap on these topics. And as always, I'm joined today by our AHLA colleague, Michael Peregrine of McDermott, who is also an AHLA fellow and a fellow of the American College of Governance Counsel. So Michael, before we dive in, I understand you had the unique privilege and joy of coming recently to my home state to hang out with some governance regulators. Tell us the story.
Well, Rob, you got to remember, I sent two kids to college in Ohio, so I think you owe me a rebate given how much I spent there. But you're right, I did spend a couple of days in Columbus. You know, over the years, I've been really fortunate enough to speak frequently to the annual meeting of what they call NASCO-NAG, the National Association of State Charity Officials and the National Association of Attorney Generals. The NASCO folks are those who serve in the charities bureaus of our state attorneys general offices, and I think who do really care very much about how not-for-profit corporations, including health systems, govern themselves. And I think it's important to note for our audience that these regulators, at least from my perspective, are very committed to preserving the nonprofit sector. And they're committed, therefore, to its support. And they want to be available to not-for-profit organizations with questions or comments or concerns. So I think it's good for our listeners who do work with not-for-profit healthcare organizations, know who the charities officials are in their state, and to reach out and maintain a relationship with them, because I think it's a good mix. And the regulators, indeed, but again, we have to keep in mind, they want the not-for-profit sector to succeed.
So Michael, turning to the report that we've talked about and the issue at hand, are we just talking about general guidance that we're used to coming out of the NACD, or is there a specific new or emerging concern they've identified?
Well, Rob, I think it's very much the latter. Keep in mind that each year NACD commissions a diverse group of business leaders to examine a governance issue of big time importance and to deliver a report with very specific practical recommendations and supportive aids. The last couple of years, I think in 2023, the report focused on culture in the boardroom, and that was a terrific one. Last year, it was board oversight of technology. This year, it's on the board management dynamic.
So Michael, I think most of our colleagues have an experience with the kind of stress and strain between their leadership groups at one time or another in their career. As you look at current dynamics, is there something special going on in your opinion?
I think the answer is yes. And what the report does is they look at three very specific trends they see, and a lot of these are CEOs, as driving the need to cultivate the board management relationship with some sense of urgency. In other words, I think they think it's really time to focus on this issue. And the first reason they think so is they see much more pressure on CEOs to perform than ever before. With challenges from a broad group of activists stakeholders, not just shareholders, but stakeholders, all types of constituents on matters going not just financial performance, but a variety of other issues. So number one, more pressure on the CEOs. Number two, I think what the report calls is an unmistakable evidence of shrinking CEO and C-suite tenure, with the average CEO tenure declining and turnover levels reaching really record levels. So that's the second concern. CEOs are serving for a lot shorter tenure. Third is that directors, the board members, for a lot of the reasons we've talked about in our podcasts, are confronting just increased complexity and ambiguity. At the same time, they're facing greater stakeholder and regulatory and judicial pressure as well to be effective overseers and to serve as strategic advisors. So I think, if you could draw a picture, you'd have two arrows coming right at each other. Both parties, the board and the CEO, are feeling pressure from outside forces, from within. And it's, I think, from the NACD's perspective, it's creating an enormous amount of stress on their relationship with each other.
So as the board tries to stay calm with these headwinds, can they adopt the approach that these kind of problems will just work out in the ordinary course?
Yeah, let's just work. Let's not worry about it. It'll work itself out. And I think the answer is, at least the NADC Commission is saying a very loud no to that question. They won't work themselves out. I think a foundational premise of the report is allowing these issues to resolve themselves organically by default. Leaves the answer to be resolved on the basis of personalities, implicit behaviors, without any clear direction or structure. And in the current environment where there's all sorts of business and economic volatility, that's not a great thing. Organic evolution of the board management dynamic without support is going to fall short. And we've all seen it. I certainly have seen it in my career. It's a sensitive issue. People don't want to poke the bear. They know it's a concern, but they don't want to confront it, and understandably so. NACD is saying confront it.
So as we think about confronting it, what do you think the alternative is?
I think this is, for our listeners, this is the real message. What the NACD report says, all right, we've got this problem. It's a big problem. We got to confront it. How do we confront it? We just don't let it evolve organically. We move towards a very deliberate process. We have a deeper commitment from both the board and the CEO to implementing and then refining leading practices with a lot greater purpose, a lot greater intentionality, all with an eye towards the problems that the organization is having. In other words, it's a call for boards and their CEOs to really build a strong foundation of trust by clarifying the parameters of their relationship, who does what, and by operationalizing the trust between them by building into their culture trust-building behaviors like better communications, more specific evaluations, use of executive sessions, and personal support. So stuff like that. But they're saying formal, commit, let's really zero in on focus on this. Let's let it back and resolve itself, because it probably won't.
So if our audience goes out and reads the report, will they find more specificity on all that?
Well, I'm going to show you up on my camera. I don't know if you can see this, but here's the report. It's big. It's about 90 pages. So they're going to take some time to, don't pick it up and try and get it during halftime of this weekend's football game. But one of the real values of these Blue Ribbon Commission reports is it goes into a lot of detail and they offer specific recommendations. This one on the board management dynamic, they break into 3 particular categories and 9 specific recommendations.
And so, Michael, you're very good at encapsulating big reports down to a manageable set of information for our audience. Can you walk us through what you see as the report's key recommendations?
Yeah, and you got to understand, I'm struggling with it. They had 9, not 10. So I have a hard time coming to grips with that, but I'll survive. But again, three specific categories of recommendations. And the first category they describe is building the trust foundation. And you've got to understand that a big part of this report is making sure that there is complete trust between the board and the CEO. So step one involves, again, an intentional effort, not just letting it evolve organically, an intentional effort to establish the basis for a real collaborative relationship between the board and the CEO, and the discipline to go back and kick the tires of it over time to make sure we're reinforcing this mutual trust. So they identify three specific action items under step one. Number one, something that a lot of us have done much over the years, delineate specific roles for the board and CEO. The point is, the more we clarify the relationship, you do this, we do that, clear swim lanes, so to speak, going to do better to anchor a strong relationship. But then explicitly define how the board and the CEO will work together in meetings and in other interactions. And then I think importantly, Rob, for the board chair, it's strengthening the independent board leaders, whether that's a board chair or independent lead director, strengthening that board leader's role as the key, the linchpin to the relationship that makes it all work. So we're adding a bit of responsibility to the chair's role, and that may come as a problem for some organizations, where this chair does not like to take a leading relationship. Going back to your point, I think the report makes it clear that none of these steps are, particularly new or unique or novel. What NAC is doing is underscoring the importance of a renewed commitment, greater consistency, and more thoughtful understanding to this critical relationship between leadership factors. Step two, all right, we've talked about building the foundation. Step two is to operationalize it. This is intended to build that strong board CEO relationship by assuring that traditional governance processes and board and CEO interactions intentionally, we designed it to operate to reinforce trust. So again, it's we're purposely structuring the way the board deals with the CEO to build trust and to sustain trust. And that means to commit to ongoing communications beyond formal meetings, to enhance board and CEO evaluations, to reinforce intended behaviors. I think that means the message to boards: we need to make sure our evaluations of ourselves are tougher. To use executive sessions as levers for accountability and transparency. And then an interesting one, Rob, to prioritize the CEO's overall well-being, which I think is a really important factor. Then step three is one that some of our listeners may not be familiar with per se, and that's leveraging trust for strategic impact. This step focuses on establishing, again, consistent behaviors. We come back to talk about the consistent behaviors and board practices, and it focuses on two things. Number one, very important, maximizing the board's value as a strategic advisor to the CEO. Number two, continually assessing board composition to align with strategy and value creation. Let me tell you what that means to me. Number one, I think a very major message of the NACD report is that there is an expectation that the board is perceived as a real strategic advisor, not just a bunch of folks who come around, sit around the table, nod their heads horizontally or vertically. That they really bring value to the table, their strategic vision, their expertise, their perspectives, so they're a resource to management. And if the CEO and the executive leadership don't see the board in that light, it's a problem. So again, it goes back to reinforcing roles and relationships. In the board's three recognized roles: decision maker, oversight body, and strategic advisor. I'll also say one thing that I found really interesting in all this, and that is I found, and I may be misreading it, I found the report is encouraging boards to move away in their composition process from competency-based boards. In other words, trying to fill every seat with someone with a specific discipline. I've never been a fan of that, but I think the NACD report is also encouraging moving towards boards with people with true strategic vision, because you're never going to get all of the subject matter experts you need, and that could, you'd have to go back to a 40-person board. So, anyways, I think those are the three categories of recommendations, and they are laid out very colorfully, very attractively, and very clearly in the report. It's tremendous grist for the mill of both the CEO and the board.
So, wow, Michael, you're right. There is a lot of detail there, but it sure seems to be a nice checklist for boards and the CEO to be guided by. I got to ask, do they say how to operationalize prioritizing the CEO's overall well-being?
I think that's one of them. They certainly draw that, and they hammer home that's one of the important aspects of the interpersonal relationship. And it goes back to the point that the interactions between the board and the CEO go well beyond just the strategic meetings. And I think part of the factor is, again, concern that CEO tenure is increasingly short, and the pressures on the CEO are great. So I think this concept of the CEO's well-being is, it's an obvious factor, but they do emphasize it. The report provides a lot of supplemental material on each of the recommendations. They just don't, it's not 5 or 6 words. Again, it's an 80-page report, 40 pages on recommendations, and that's a lot, a whole lot for the board to dig into.
One of the things I've always found valuable about the NACD reports is they also offer practical tools to help implement those recommendations. Do you think they've achieved that here?
Oh, absolutely. I think almost half of the 80 pages are committed to actionable and practical guidance to help boards and CEOs implement the recommendations. They identify 12 specific tools for consideration, ranging from guidelines that clarify the boundaries of both parties. In other words, a list of here are the basic duties of the board and of the CEO. And we've all seen those, but they do a really good job of that. And then specific ways of, institutionalizing the board's role as a strategic advisor. Those are some of the ones that I thought particularly important. There are a couple of tools with respect to the compensation committee and the CEO's comp too. So again, 40 pages on practical tools. It's I think from a corporate counsel's perspective, boy, it's a terrific resource.
So after having gone through this report, would you say the NACD report constitutes a best practice for us in the industry?
You and I have had this conversation before, and it's a hot button for me, and not just because I'm a crabby old guy, but I do think the term best practice is one of the most misapplied and misunderstood terms in governance discourse. To me, best practices are defined as a process, a method, or a conceptual approach that has a clear historical record of success, achievement, or accomplishment. It's worked. It goes beyond the level attained by less structured efforts. It's more than what's minimally required by law. And again, the best practice is designed to identify or flag behavior that's required, that goes, again, beyond what's accepted by minimum legal standards. It's not intended to reflect the full spectrum of applicable law. They're aspirational goals. They're not legal requirements or mandates. In the governance context, they're proposals designed to enhance and improve corporate responsibility and boardroom conduct. So again, I'm just really careful about saying that's best practice. That's not best practice.
So taking note of that and not wanting to hit that hot button, do you think others may consider it a best practice report?
Well, for a particular price, I'm happy to say anything's best practice, but we can negotiate that offline. But the answer to your question is sure. I do think so. It's a subjective judgment. There's no accrediting body or commissioner or a grand high exalted mystic ruler who, and by the way, if anybody on this listening to this podcast remembers who the grand high exalted mystic ruler is, call Rob Gerberry and he will award you a prize. I have the answer to that question though. Anyways, there's no body that says this is a best practice. With the NACD, I think their Blue Ribbon Commission, the way they go about doing it, 2025 recognized executives, board members from across the spectrum, they're the ones providing the real work. I think you got to say that's best practice. We're not talking about a consulting firm survey. We're talking about real intellectual capital from people that have a strategic perspective. It's aspirational goal setting at its best. So, yeah, I tell my clients, consider this best practice. And remember what the courts have said for years, that the conscientious pursuit of governance best practices is the best prophylactic for director liability. The effort to consider and review and address best practices and how they would apply to your organization is what counts. It's not that you have a resolution of the board that says we're going to adopt every recommendation in the NACD report. No, it's and I think this is the real message that we want to send for today's audience. Talk to the board chair, talk to the CEO, say these are things that we think we recommend that you consider, whether it's the governance committee or it's an ad hoc committee with the CEO or and board leaders, whatever. Look at these, review them, and decide what makes sense for our organization, if at all. But it's the effort to consider them, Rob, that I think is the real demonstration of good faith. That you do get a gold star for.
So, Michael, thank you as always for sharing these thoughts with us. We'll be back again next month with the first of our two-part series where we'll be discussing the guidelines for board oversight of artificial intelligence implementation and other ways in which the board may interact with new technologies. Until then, this is Rob Gerberry and Michael Peregrine saying thanks again for joining us. We look forward to talking to you in our next podcast.